slightly more than fag bucket questions, but
similar vibe.
Similar vibe. Okay, cool. Hi everyone. I'm going to put that
Do you
down.
want us looking into the camera or
No,
the cameras?
to each other, but I'm going to do a little intro,
Okay,
so ignore
great.
the cameras. But hi everyone, Charles here from the Greater Man Challenge. I am here today with Amelia Wrighton from Suicide&Co, and we are going to have a discussion about all things charity-based and about what you do. Slightly. There you go. Cool. Can you take us back to the beginning of Suicide&Co? What inspired you to start the charity? And tell us a bit about your story.
Yes, absolutely. So my story regarding Suicide&Co starts when I was 19, when I was at university in my first year, and I very sadly lost my mum to suicide. My mum had struggled with mental health for many years and had a diagnosis of bipolar, but because I was 19 at the time that she died, a lot of what she was going through hadn't really been shared with me. I wasn't really aware of it. A lot of it was masked in physical illness. And when she died, it was absolutely devastating. I'm an only child. My parents are divorced. It was an incredibly sort of isolating time where I felt very thrust into independence. And even though I had amazing family and friends, and still do, the rhetoric that I sort of took just through my subconscious was that I needed to not let it define me, and I needed to stay on the rails. I was at uni and I liked to party, and that was just what I was doing. And so those two sort of things basically meant that I just suppressed a lot of the grief that I was feeling, and I just didn't feel comfortable sort of asking for help or raising the white flag. And that suppression led to my own mental health struggles and even physical struggles, things like alopecia. But when I eventually got counselling, for me, that was the moment that I realised I was going to be able to heal, and sort of that unlocked my broader healing journey. But where Suicide&Co all began is sort of 8 years after my mum had died. I was working in media and I met my co-founder Emma, and she had also experienced a similar loss. And for me at that time, it was one of the first times I'd had a conversation about that. She actually noticed me saying the same things that she says around Christmas to sort of avoid talking about a parent. And she asked me outright, did mum pass? And I said yes. And she said, did mum die by suicide? And I said, yes, like weird witch person. And that conversation or glass of wine led to, you know, an all-night conversation about our lived experience of grief and of suicide-related grief. And it was fascinating. We both come from really different backgrounds and, you know, different family setups, and she and I's experience was really similar. Like really delayed grief, lack of support, couldn't find any charities or organisations, felt like suicide loss was never really spoken about. And so a couple of weeks later, she was like, I want to start an organisation. And I'm thought of a really cool brand name, which is Suicide&Co, where the &Co stands for a reminder that you always have company. And I love marketing and I've been in that for my career. So I was like, that does sound really great. And then we conducted this big research study into the space and saw what was out there. And it was gobsmacking to see that there was just this gaping hole in suicide bereavement services in the UK. I will never say that suicide prevention is well funded, because I don't believe that, and not with broader mental health care either. But this was a really identifiable gap where there was just one charity that had been going that was dealing with suicide loss nationally, but doing peer-to-peer support, which is great, but that can't be the only option. And for such a broad community that are affected by suicide loss, it should be more. But I did try at that time to kind of find everything I could do to just not have to be the one that did it. But after the research and kind of like really building that case and seeing what that looked like, we decided to start the charity.
I mean, I can't, obviously there's never an easier time to lose a parent or a friend to suicide, but developmentally speaking, at that age when you're becoming an adult, I suppose, like you know, how trying and testing that must have been for you. And it's interesting that, you know, you said you love to party. I share that with you, and I think it's a very positive thing, but also, you know, that can also be a problem, and it's been a problem with so many people that I know that have you know, been experiencing bereavement from the loss of a loved one, and sort of, you know, going down that addiction route, which is something we're going to touch on later on in other interviews with people that we've got lined up. You sort of segued into another one of my questions that I had written down, which was, you know, that there's a hell of a lot out there of suicide prevention, but what is it, you know, that they're the people that are left behind? And can you give us an insight into, you know, what that looks like? You know, the support from the government, from the NHS. You know, what's the standardised response for, you know, a family or a person who's experienced a bereavement by suicide?
You've teed that question up perfectly, because I mean, like, but I mean perfectly, but not, because I mean, unfortunately, at the moment, there isn't a standard in the UK for suicide loss. If you think about other bereavement pathways, if you've lost someone to cancer or accident or even homicide, they have really quite well-established referral pathways that have existed with whatever emergency service is going to touch it, be that hospital, police. And you are often, well, in most cases, adamantly put into touch with a charity that can then, like, support you. That doesn't exist in suicide loss. It definitely didn't exist before 2019. In 2019, some funding came in from the government to trial that, and technically every locality has received that funding and has set up a little service, be that within an existing bereavement service or its own one. But it was basically a drop in the ocean and was so sort of flash in the pan that many of those services either have been absorbed or they don't quite fully exist. So unfortunately, at the moment, it's a real postcode lottery. It's difficult to say what the standard is, which is a large part as to why we decided to be national at Suicide&Co from day one. Because it's shocking to me that every day people's lives are being absolutely shattered by suicide loss. A policeman's turning up, you know, somebody's ringing someone to tell them that their loved one has died by suicide, and in that moment people don't know where to turn, and they really don't. And even beyond that, a lot of people don't feel deserving of support, like, because grief is so broad and so vast, you know. I think we feel often in society like grief is something that we should just be able to sort of deal with, like, you know, breakups or things like that. But my view on that is, if you've gone through something where there's an element of trauma and there's a traumatic response, and that could be a huge myriad of things, and loss or relationship breakdown or work, you are fully deserving of support, and that support can take on many different guises. It could be counselling, it could be reading a book, a podcast, a conversation with a mate, but it takes an instinct to think, I should get support for that. And so I think, unfortunately, because there aren't established pathways, and because of the sort of societal stigma around topics like suicide loss, the norm is that people sort of go into survival mode, which is when coping strategies can be healthy or unhealthy, and don't reach out for support. It is changing, and we're definitely seeing that as we grow and our awareness increases, but that's the big systemic piece that we are actively going after.
It's interesting. It's almost like a sort of a welcome catch-22 to have, that you're encouraging more people to have the discussion and talk and reach out for help, and then more people are reaching out for help, and then obviously you're like, oh my goodness, we need to get and provide more help.
Yeah.
And, you know, having spoken ahead of this on our initial call, you know, you're obviously going in through a growth stage, you're hiring people, and, you know, what does that look like? How are you looking after your own mental health? Because you know, you've got a lot going on.
We, in May, had 118 people apply for counselling. June so far, 25, we've got 97 people. So that, it's so amazing to see new people reach out, but with it comes a direct need to fundraise. have constantly been trying to catch up with demand. And yes, we're in a growth spurt now, but only on the hiring perspective, because that growth has basically, since we started, just never relented. Like, I thought I was creating a nice side hustle to get some purpose. Instead, we've created this beautiful monster that is just growing so fast because the demand and the need was just so unmet. So I guess that, like, I use the word relentless, which sounds quite negative. It can feel very, like, pressured. And so we as a team try and take really good care of ourselves and prioritise our mental health and self-care within that. So I am not the best at always practicing what I preach, but I would say that over the last 2 years, I've worked incredibly hard to try and get some balance into my life so that I'm not just a total workaholic. I have great family and friends. I'm going to a million weddings at the moment in the summer.
There's the partying again.
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, it's hard, isn't it? A lot of people think that balance involves, in our society, balance involves adding more of another thing rather than reducing the thing that you're doing too much of. However, you are kind of in this sort of self-fulfilling snowball of progress, and purpose has been a big thing that we've sort of been discussing for us, is that it's, in this day and age, it's such a precious commodity because there seems to be so little purpose. And in a society where, and we spoke about this before in our initial call, that there is the observation that men tend to do their bonding side by side and women can do it face to face. And mental health affects everybody. You know, women's mental health affects men, men's affects women. However, statistically speaking, you know, as a man, you are up to 80% more likely. I mean, 80% of suicides are men. And so rather than treating it as a separate concern, we wanted to sort of highlight it and dial in as men and try and uncover what it is that generates this stigma. And in a society where there's a lot less opportunity to be doing that side-by-side bonding, there's a lot of loneliness, a great deal of loneliness that's sort of self-fulfilling and propagating with the advent of, you know, social media, which has obviously been around for a long time. But, you know, our goal is to promote more face-to-face for men. Yeah. You know, adopting the more sort of from the more sort of feminine aspects of bonding whilst doing something side by side. There's a really unique focus in your work on giving a voice to those bereaved by suicide. What does that actually look like in action? And can you share anecdotally a story, obviously not mentioning names, but you know, of the positive effects when you really saw that happening for the first time?
Yeah, totally. Yeah, so I mean, we're very focused on those bereaved by suicide. Absolutely, that is the community that we felt weren't being heard and weren't being given access to support. And I think the reason why that was so important was, one of the reasons, was because, firstly, people bereaved by suicide are at a higher risk of suicide themselves. Like, statistically, that's not a rule. It's just a stat that's out there. It's one of 4 high-risk audiences for suicide. And so the ability to get support directly to those people that's tailored to the biggest presenting issue felt really powerful for suicide prevention as a whole. But also for those who are bereaved by suicide, you know, it is a traumatic loss. It's really important to be able to give them a space that they feel heard in, because in many, our community can feel isolated from broader mental health services for 2 reasons. One is their loved ones died from mental health and the mental health system didn't save their loved one, right? So there can be that thing of like, well, they called the helpline and they're still dead, or they called their, you know, whatever. That can feel like, why would I trust in this system if it didn't save my person? Some people can feel like that. The other thing that often comes up, which always breaks my heart, is when they go to general bereavement groups and they've got people who've maybe lost children and that's what they're bonding over. They can feel like the lesser citizen. They can feel like the one where, like, their person chose. And I hate the concept of choice when it comes to suicide, because it's very complex and it can often be made to seem very simplistic, and it's not. But it can be made to seem like that their loved one didn't want to be here, whereas everybody else's did, and that can make them feel kind of an extra layer of shame. So our community purposefully gives them a space where they are absolutely knowing they're speaking to experts who've been trained in the specificities of suicide bereavement, and it gives their voices an opportunity to say things that they can't say to loved ones as well, right? So in something like a traumatic loss, often people feel guilt or blame, or maybe even think that about a different family member or a different friend, but they can't say that to each other because they don't actually mean it, but they are feeling feelings of anger or frustration. Whereas in counselling, it's like completely confidential, and you can say these things out loud and realise, you know, you're not a bad person, or that's feelings normal and should be validated. And so for me, I think the kind of massive impact that we make is the ability to give somebody 12 hours, like 12 sessions with a professional to really explore some of those darkest, most complex emotions about losing somebody to suicide, in a safe space that then allows them to have that community confidence. So then go and chat to your mates, then go and, you know, feel more confident to talk about it with your manager whilst you're navigating loss. So that I would say is like the way that we deal with, like the way that we work with that community and giving them a voice. In terms of a story, to be honest, like I have so many I can think of. I mean, we supported 1,337 people in one-to-one care last year alone.
Wow.
So when it comes, and sometimes I think when I think of those stats, I'm like, if I saw you all in person, I would faint. I don't know what would happen. Like, it would be so bizarre. But I think, I mean, for example, okay, so one that I will think of is we had a piece of client feedback come in like at 10 a.m. Yesterday, so on a Monday morning, and they filled out the client survey after they've kind of had their counselling, and their quotation was pretty much word for word. You know, when I first came into counselling, I was having suicidal thoughts every day, and I'm now at a point where I haven't had that for many weeks. I've looked at getting a new job. I'm going to, like, all of these things had been unlocked for this person, and it wasn't just the emotional thing. It was the practicality of being able to build their life back up around grief. And yeah, I mean, but we probably get feedback like that, like several times a week. So it's major life-changing work, but it's also always so unique to the person. But for me, I love it when we see people who have come to us at a complete point of despair, unsure of whether the future is something that they want, and they get to a place where they feel like their life is worth living with their grief in a manageable space, and with a like desire to build their life back up around their grief. That for me is just like when we see that and people check in, and I love it when people reach out like 2 years after they've had counselling, or and say like, oh, I'm doing great, we're about to have a child, or something like that. It's just a really lovely moment. So yeah, very proud of the community we've built.
As you should. I mean, it was so inspiring and amazing, and you know, it's since, you know, starting our project all of 8 weeks ago. You know, the support, feedback, again, coming back to the purpose has been amazing. I wanted to touch on what you were talking about, grief, you know, sort of the headline of people not being able to deal with grief. And in our society, you know, I can speak as a British person who grew up in the UK in an old-fashioned family, you know, feelings were not spoken about. In fact, it was a bad thing to talk about your feelings. And you know, what we do as humans to move away from pain.
Oh, yeah.
You know, and we get brought up, you know, as children. You know, I can speak to my own experience. Brought up as a boy, a very young, emotional boy. You shouldn't cry. You know, shouldn't talk about how you feel, and so you develop these adaptations that are survival techniques. You know, and mine was humour and being the centre of attention. You know, always wanting that attention. And then later in life, it became alcohol and became drugs, and it was fun because you know, party boy, you know, but then it wasn't fun anymore, and those epic nights that you used to remember just kind of started paling into insignificance, and then causing problems, acting out in ways that were damaging my relationships with others. And I've seen this happen with so many of my friends because there is this cognitive dissonance, this framework built in that it's not okay to be suffering. It's not okay, and that you should do anything to move away from that. And at the beginning, it's the small things, and then they get bigger and bigger and bigger, and then they backfire. And actually, something that I've been chatting to the guys about is turning toward pain and acknowledging when you're being aggressive outwardly, whether it be violent communication, or whether you're going out and buying drugs, or using alcohol. What's the pain that you're moving away from? And for me, what I recognized was that I'm moving away from unprocessed grief, from the loss of relationships, largely relationships that I've never had. But since infancy, I've been wanting to, and then having to turn around and learn how to parent myself, and being a parent myself, sort of in my mind, parenting my parents, parenting myself for the things I didn't get through no fault of theirs. They did the very best that they could, and then parenting my child as well, and I've seen so many times where it's gone too far, and that the drink and the drugs, and people cannot face their pain, and then they
But how do you
take the
think
ultimate
you
choice.
got to that? How do you think you got to that place where you realised that you were running away from unprocessed grief or pain? Because that's fabulous, but surely you've been through a huge journey of therapy and everything to get to that place.
Ultimately, I was on self-destruct, and I got to a point where I made choices that irrevocably changed the course of my life, and I had to make a choice. And that was either I keep going in the direction I'm going and lose everything, or I make a decision now just to stop drinking, which gives me complete choice over my actions. Because alcohol for me, it wasn't the problem. The problem I had was my unprocessed grief and the mental health.
But how did you get to linking the fact that was the unprocessed grief? How did you come there on your own? Did you journal?
I've had a lot of therapy.
Yeah.
And I've done a lot of journaling. Because that's the thing
that I'm I agree with you fully, right? But in our current society, I have, the system is failing people constantly. And if you have got to, everybody needs to survive. Everybody needs to be in survival mode. If you've gone through something difficult, you've had difficult childhood, or if it's just low-level things that have built up over time and unprocessed have all amalgamated into one, right? We all have to learn how to be able to then hold down a job, have a friend, whatever, all of those different things. And so many of us will get these methods of doing that, some of which then can turn unhealthy. And then when you especially have something chemically that you're using as a coping strategy, then when addiction takes over and actual physical, addiction takes over, for me, when you're at that point, the system is not able to cope. The public system isn't, the private system is, but is so inaccessible to...
Because it costs so much money.
Yeah, we are dealing with so many people who don't have access to basic counselling. The wait lists are too long. The GPs do not have the time to identify whether their constant lower immune system is because something is going on at home or anything like that. Schools aren't picking it up. Can be so overwhelming if you think about where we both are, having had lots of therapy, realize the self-awareness we have to understand what coping strategies were healthy, what aren't, and be in that space. My passion, and it's why your new project is going to be fantastic because it's taking it to the masses through the form of film. I want more stories about how the masses, how the average person can access and go on a journey of self-healing. And that, in my opinion, realistically, is applying to charities, applying to free support, not feeling embarrassed to reach out and get some counselling, then reading a book, doing some journaling, listening to some YouTube videos. You have got, just how many people go to the gym with no real vibe, but they just want to look great, feel great, wear the right clothes. to be in a mentally like strong place where we can understand what our stuff is, what our coping strategies are, is a big journey to go on. But we have to start giving people stories of what that is versus just, I think at the moment what we see is like someone on the news running the marathon and you're like, fabulous, but how the hell have you gone from being on the sofa in floods of tears like I am to doing that? Like, give me a pathway.
Yeah. Jumping around talking about addiction, actually,
Yes,
and like
yeah.
moving away from pain, and how, you know, how can we provide, I suppose, real world examples of how people can lift themselves up, because a lot of it can seem very inaccessible, and with the advent of Instagram and sort of the new spiritual realm, it can be a little bit off-putting because there's a lot of spiritual jargon and buzzwords and stuff, and you see someone who looks fabulous on a beach in Bali with feathers in their hair sort of proffering this advice that all you have to do is change the way you think and your whole world will change. And that's not the case.
No.
It takes hard work.
Yeah.
But I can personally testify to the fact that doing that work is easier than staying where you are, because when you're consistently trying to move away from pain, you're never going to make the pain fall away. In fact, the pain's only going to get worse. And the practice of turning towards it and stepping into it, and not turning it into a narrative, not being like, oh, I'm in pain because this, and this, and all these hypothetical situations, and oh, the world's going to end. Just park that, and just be like, yeah, I'm feeling really sad, and sit with that. And within minutes, you know, maybe you'll sob, maybe the grief will pour out of you, you know, and it does fall away.
It's interesting because I mean, I totally see that with addiction, and my only real experience clinically of that would be like how we treat addiction in the service, but also how when I've gone to lots of these, like lent into the psychotherapy world and everything, and my exposure to that. But I think when it comes to grief in our service, because we're so not known about in the UK, like if you think about the fact that 36,000 people are directly bereaved by suicide every year, taking a multiplier of 6 people per person who's died by suicide, and we supported 1,337 last year, right? There's a huge amount of people who aren't getting support, but the people who are finding us, because we haven't been on the news, you know, all of this stuff, they're in their pain. They are like, I fucking need help. And I would love to be able to see, I mean, like in 10 years' time, we've got a much bigger market impact, and I don't want anyone to navigate suicide loss alone. That is my real mission. I really want people to be told in their really early days that they are worthy of support and it's there if they want it. I think that the index of people sat in their pain that we get is very, very high. I mean, I think probably somebody that, you know, AA would say the same, of when people come into the program, a vast majority, or at least the people who stay in the program, are tired and at a turning point of being like, I actually need help. But my opinion on that in terms of grief is we shouldn't be letting it get to that place. We should be saying in week 1 of bereavement, this is the fucking worst. Like, you are deserving of so much support. You've got to navigate a ton of practical shit and loads of emotional stuff, and we're going to be here to keep you company. And that's why, you know, what we say, that would be our tagline. But like, it makes so much sense that they're deserving of that, because yes, your mental health is going to deteriorate. We cannot avoid that. But there is an absolute ability to prevent mental health deterioration to a point where you are having to actively sit in that pain all the time. Like, it is, there's this amazing metaphor from this clinician, Josh Dixon. I don't know whether it is his, but I always give him credit for it. You know, he talks about a point where if you get your hand, okay, and you look at your hand this way, and like imagine that is the biggest trauma that you've been through in your life, or the biggest moment of pain, right? And we're just going to do it very quickly. Don't actually get into it because I can't do a therapy session afterwards. But If you bring that up to your face, right, you can see, and you're trying to look at it, you're trying to look at the detail, but you can't really see the detail, can't really see anything around it, it's all really blurry. What counselling and self-care is doing is bringing that hand out. It's moving it just away and just move it slightly further away. Not only does it come into focus, but you can see other things around. You can move your eyes. When your eyes are like this, even when you move them, you can't see. And that change of perspective and that ability to be able to see what was there, it's not going to go away. You know, that is going to be there. But you're able to be like, I'm going to look at it and I'll look at it and fuck, that hurts. But I'm also able to move my eyes over there and I'm able to move my eyes over there.
Yeah.
And in my, like, that's why I talk about grief, your life growing back up around grief, because around anniversaries, or if I get, you know, something comes up for me, I can fall back into a pit of sadness about my mum, which is heartbreaking. It is raw, it is painful. I would almost say as painful as it was. The difference is I have the ability, the coping strategies, the reflexes to bounce back faster, like fitness, right? Like that's all that we're trying to do, is give ourselves the ability.
Training the muscle. Yeah.
Yes, to do that. And I think that is, for me, the goal. It's like, yes, to be able to sit in that pain and address it and understand it, but to live a fucking great, joyful, lovely life around what we've been through.
Yeah.
And bring that hope back into it, because recovery, you know, finding all of these things, words like resilience, they're tiring. And I've always felt that. Every time somebody says that, I'm like, that sounds exhausting.
Yeah, and there is, again, in I mean, fortunately, social media now, you know, with yourself, us, you know, people are using it to show the reality of life, but a lot of it has been this rose-tinted imaginary world that no one really lives in, and a lot of it is geared up towards this chasing of happiness and happiness and happiness. And happiness, like sadness, like many other emotions, is there 1 second, enjoy it or experience it or work through it, and then it falls away.
Yeah.
Contentment is something that I think is a kind of base level that I would aspire to, because looking for happiness all the time is kind of a fool's errand, and you're teeing yourself up for failure. And, you know, in Buddhist Dharma, you know, it says that, you know, when you come to the end of your life, it's probably going to be 50-50 pleasure pain. And it's so much more painful just trying to not be in pain, coming back round, than it is just to experience it. And I'm not, and you know, and I'm not. I don't have the wool over my eyes, because I'm aware that I have a very good, open, emotionally literate group of friends and an extended network, and there are people out there who really do not have that. And you know, I feel very lucky that I can go to my friends, you know, and say, hey, I'm having a really bad day today. And you know, and I did it the other day. You know, I just started crying. I was working in a co-working space near home, and some tears started rolling down my cheeks, and I was like, God. And then I thought, you know, I've just started this bloody boat project. I've got a WhatsApp group with 3 dudes in it. I'm just going to say, hey, I'm having a really bad day. And within half an hour, we'd had this amazing conversation, and suddenly I felt lifted up. You know, but I recognise that a lot of people don't have that, and then they might go, hey, mate, I'm feeling really bad, and they'll be like, oh, you know, well, don't do anything stupid.
Yes.
And that is a dangerous, a potentially dangerous thing to be. So what would you say to people, you know, who maybe don't feel like they have that network? Like, who should they reach out to? Where should they look to for help?
Services. Like, I get frustrated at the amount of like suicide prevention activity, but also mental health adverts and people on social media who like, we must talk. You know, they'll have a really shocking stat about suicide, and then they'll be like, and so we must talk. Like, let's, you know, ask twice, all of this stuff. And I'm like, that is not enough. Like, if the vast majority of people do not have confidence in themselves to have a conversation, or in the people they'd be speaking to, like, I hear it so often of even parents, like, not knowing what to say to a child who's come and said, you know, I'm actually struggling. Then in the interim of that, you need to go to services. Services are awesome. They are cool. Yes, they have wait lists. Yes, they need funding, but like, they are out there. And if you search for them, you will find them. Like, that is my biggest thing.
So who would you recommend? Like,
well, it depends.
Someone sitting at home having these feelings.
To be honest, like, it really depends what they were going through, where they live locally. Like, it's not an easy thing to find, I'm not going to lie. But I mean, a good port of call, if you aren't sure and Google isn't coming up with anything, then I would highly suggest calling Samaritans and just saying, look, I'm looking for support. If it's somebody young struggling with suicidal ideation, or a parent supporting a young person, I'd highly recommend Papyrus. If you live in London and you are a suicidal man in crisis, I would suggest James's Place. I mean, I have a directory, just file of facts in my head, but the ultimate thing is, the system is quite fragmented, it is quite broken, right? If you're suffering from suicidal ideation and you've lost someone to suicide and that's a presenting need you're going through, then we are the experts and you should come to us, factually, ring us 9 to 5, send us an email, get in touch. But for other things, I mean, for example, you know, I would always say, even with grief, trying to identify where you think that like presenting need is, or where the thing is the most impactful, because when people are in their loss, feeling like the part that is to do with suicide is the biggest thing that they're really struggling with or that they're processing, then we are the right experts 100%. But there are other charities out there that are brilliant. Like if you are a young widow and you've lost your partner to suicide, and actually at that moment or that month or that half a year, whatever, the bit that you're just devastated about is that you're a widow and you're a single parent or a double parent, as some people say, which I love, then there's a charity called Widowed and Young. And they work with people who are under 50 and have lost a partner. Well, that's fantastic. But that person could get benefit from both charities, or one charity at one point, one at another. And that's the thing, like it's everybody's support journey is going to need to have a multi-agency approach in reality, and look at multi-agency as, you know, going to your gym to keep your healthcare up, as well as working with your mental health team and a local charity, or, you know, getting private counselling and being on a charity's Facebook group to connect with others. It's huge.
Yeah,
We need to be more playful.
Yeah, be more playful. I think breaking down those, because like you said, there are a lot of silos, but people are also, you know, everyone's working their asses off because there's so much to do, and it is under-resourced by the sounds of it in relation to how much support is needed out there. But I suppose to people watching that, you know, we don't want you to feel overwhelmed. Everything that Amelia's spoken about, I will link below with a little description of, you know, if you're, you know, this is your situation, head here. So hopefully that'll be helpful. But really from us, and I agree with what you said, jumping back to your point about the fact people are saying, you know, ask twice, you know, and a lot of male public figureheads in the context of men's mental health have stood up and said, men need to talk about their feelings, men need to talk about things. None of them are actually talking about their feelings. They're just saying that they need to talk about their feelings. And for us, what we wanted to do was have 4, you know, however normal we might be, guys, you know, working on a very physical project, whilst also tying in the themes of mental health, and being able to talk openly about the guilt, the shame, the grief, the inner child, the inner critic, the inner saboteur, sexuality, all of these different things that just aren't spoken about.
No.
And hopefully that will make it feel more accessible.
Yeah.
You know.
I think literally modelling the behaviour we want to see is what we need more of. And like, you know, we need people saying that in that conversation that they got help here and they did this, and oh my God, my first counselling session I went to was the weirdest thing ever, and then I liked it. Like, we need more of that stuff, because I think it will make it more normalised, 100%. And also, we need to get out of the echo chamber. Like, hopefully, whatever you're making gets into Netflix or somewhere massive, because the mental health space is an echo chamber. Like, every time I do a public presentation, every time we post on social media, I'm like, really, when we're doing something about public education, you're not the audience. Because you're the audience that have been trained in mental health, or you've gone through something awful yourself, or you follow us on social. You're not the ones that need to be told to get support, because you're already here. And yes, it may take you a little bit of time to, you know, from following us to apply for counselling, but it's the people who haven't heard of Papyrus, or haven't heard of Suicide&Co, or don't know that their mates are following a mental health charity or an influencer that's talking openly and authentically about his feelings. Those are the ones we really need to try and get to bring them into, or make the chamber bigger.
Yeah, and it's, I completely agree with you. You know, I've been fortunate enough to travel to some amazing places, and there are sort of these new age spiritual hubs where people go and everyone's doing their healing and their yoga and everything like that, but it is a bubble. And when you're in it, it feels amazing.
Yeah,
doing the work,
beautiful.
but you're not reaching the broader everyday person who doesn't have that luck or that privilege to be within those situations. And one of our charity partners, Tough to Talk, so their thing is, and we'll have an interview with Steve Whittle, the founder, is going into organisations where sharing what you feel is just not a thing that happens. You know, one of their biggest clients is Balfour Beatty, the Europe's largest construction firm, where that stuff doesn't get talked about, and they have incredibly high suicide rates within organisations like that. And just anecdotally, as an example, that's coming back to what you're talking about. There are people in the echo chamber, but we need to go broad, and it has to be accessible, and it has to be real.
Yeah, 100%. And I think it also needs to be systemic change. Like, we need organisations like that going in and doing awareness, giving those men, those hard to reach audiences a second to think, hang on, why am I actually feeling low mood the whole time? Should I go and talk to my GP, or should I talk to my wife, or open up to my mate at the bar, or whatever that's going to be? But we also need organisations that they go into to have the right care on offer. We need, you know, a whole range of things to fall into place so that we're in a situation where ultimately we have the same instincts and community confidence as we do in physical health.
Yeah. And that's a very good point. I was just thinking about physical health and leading into it, that if someone is diagnosed with cancer or Parkinson's or any manner of physically presenting conditions or ailments, that people will be able to rush to their bedside or wherever it is and give them the support they need. But a lot of these conditions are actually physical representations and presentations from stress-related causes and mental health conditions. You know, if you read Gabor Mate is an incredible resource, and he's a clinical physician who's been working with trauma for 55 years, and he has a book called When the Body Says No: The Cost of Hidden Stress, and he has over 5 decades of research showing how stress and not looking after your mental health lead to physical illness. And yet there's this stigma that we can support people who are presenting with these physical illnesses, but someone's got mental health. Oh no, it's sort of, people don't know what to do with it. And it makes people feel very uncomfortable.
I mean, the link isn't there. I mean, 6 months after my mum died, I was at the hairdresser and they found a bald patch at the back of my head, and then they actually found like 4, and I'd been losing the back of my hair to alopecia, which had never happened before. And again, I'm 19, I've got long blonde hair at the time, and now I've got an identity crisis of can you see the bald patches? All my friends are being like, no, not really, or maybe a bit there, and I'm like, how did I not notice my hair falling out? Go to the doctor, and he's like, oh, he looks at it and he's like, oh yeah, that's stress, and he was like, do you have any stress in your life? And my first answer was no, because I thought stress was exam problems, family problems, financial problems. And in my head, I was at uni and I didn't think I was stressed. I was just at uni. But actually then, luckily, I managed to, after probably about 5 minutes, be like, oh, and I did lose my mum to suicide sort of 6 months ago. And at that point, I wasn't signposted to any support. I was told to be less stressed. And I was like, and get some hair nutrients. And I was like, I'm leaving here with an ability to not know whether I'm going to get my hair back. The stress, nobody told me to take extra care after grief and eat protein and do all the things that you're supposed to do. No one said that. So yeah, I think it's just that joining up of physical and mental health and understanding, GPs, the average session is 8 minutes. If somebody's presenting with muscle tension and constant fatigue and things like that, are they really getting to the cause of whether that person has depression? I mean, I've also gone into the GP previously and been in floods of tears and said I wasn't sleeping and walked out with antidepressants in the space of half an hour. So, there's a big systemic issue we need to address, I think, but also don't want to be in an overwhelming way. I mean it in a way that is I hope affirming to people of if you have been struggling, if you are in a place where this feels like you're alone and it's difficult to deal with, it's because that is the system, right? But there is loads of support out there. It is a little bit difficult to find, but you can go to sites like ours, like your guys, and you can find it. And if you take that positive action bit by bit, like, you know, there will be support out there and things that you can access.
Yeah, I mean, I think you're absolutely right, and it can feel very overwhelming because we need societal, systemic, governmental, mental change, but help is out there. And I guess the message is, I think we'll probably sign off now because we could go on for ages. I wrote like 10 questions down, and I've asked one, and we've kind of gone poof, which has been amazing. But yeah, help is out there, and you're not alone, is the message. I think that really I would like to give. And yeah, thank you so much.
Yeah.
It's been really insightful, and I've got a feeling we're going to be seeing a lot more of each other in various guises.
Yeah, no, I'm very excited to see where you guys go with this. It's great.
Great.
Yay.
Thank you so much, Amelia.
Oh, pleasure.
That was awesome.
Thank you.